Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our livecast, The Collective Wisdom of High-Performing Women, Leadership Lessons from the Judy Project. My name is Sandra Rayner, and I'm the Vice President of Product and Marketing at the Institute of Health and Human Potential, or as we call it, IHHP. I would like to thank all of you for choosing to spend your time with us today. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about IHHP. We are a people development organization that has been at the forefront of teaching the essential skills of emotional intelligence for almost 25 years. We teach people how to harness the emotions that stand in the way of building the skills to collaborate and engage across the organization. We help people build the skills of emotional intelligence through our training, coaching, keynotes, and assessments. We help people work better together. IHHP sponsors these live casts because we really believe in learning, and we want to share the opportunity for people to connect with topics that are relevant to them in their current situations. Our clients are typically talent leaders, HR professionals, and organizational leaders. And the people in our community come from across all functions and levels in the organization. Our goal is to provide as much opportunity as possible for everyone to share wisdom and to learn from one another. After the live cast, we will be sharing different pieces of information. So tomorrow, if you're a SURE member, everybody will get the professional development credit information. We'll also give you an opportunity to share your stories of wisdom and information on how to buy the book. Next week, we'll send out access to the video replay of the live cast, downloadable key takeaways and research. We'll also release our new content over the next couple of weeks. So stay updated via our LinkedIn event, or subscribe to IHHP to receive the updates. We also want you to stay connected. So during the presentation, use the chat function to interact with other attendees and ask questions. And I can see people are taking advantage of that. That's great. Please reach out for us for any troubleshooting or technical support, and join our LinkedIn event to get more answers to your questions and continue the conversation after the event. And now to move to today's live event. Our host today is my colleague, Dr. Cranla Warren. She is an organizational psychologist and Vice President of Leadership Development here at IHHP. She is passionate about emotional intelligence, its leadership and workplace culture, and she believes that emotional intelligence is foundational in developing great leaders, creating high levels of employee engagement, and building great places to work. She inspires us with her commitment to learning. She brings a wealth of knowledge and professional experience and has a PhD in organizational psychology and a professional postgraduate certificate in leadership. Cranla, I now turn over the live cast to you.
Thank you, Sandra, for that kind introduction. Yes, I am your live cast host for today. I'm also a fan of these women that you're about to hear from today, their stories, and the great things that they are doing to shape the future of leadership. Welcome to all of you from around the world. I was really, bowled over as I saw people introducing themselves in the chat. You've chosen to spend this hour with us, and we really want to make it worth your while. Thanks also for your excellent questions and the comments you submitted when you registered. We've pulled them into themes, and we're going to do our very best to get through as many themes as we can today. Before I introduce our first guest, I wanted to share a little something. I was reading an article last week with the headline, "Will 2021 be the year that leadership becomes feminine?" Interesting, and so timely given this live cast topic today. If we pause and think about this year, there are definitely some notable stats and activities on the female leadership front. Globally, there are more top female leaders than ever before. In the Canadian House of Commons, we have almost 30% female representation, up from 26% 6 years ago. In the US, about 25% of the legislature is female. Everyone's heard by now, Kamala Harris just became the first woman vice president, and half of the Biden-Harris administration's cabinet is female. And women leaders are making gains in business as well. For the first time in history, All S&P 500 firms have at least one female board member. This is unprecedented. The number of women CEOs in the S&P 500 hit an all-time high by the end of 2020 at just under 8%. Now, I think most of us would agree that women are expected to be relational, inclusive, and communal. These are traits that are very much more associated with motherhood and nurturing than they are to leadership. I'm so happy to say this is finally changing. We know that men and leaders are expected to be confident, assertive, and independent. And I'll tell you that the most recent evidence suggests that women are now perceived to be equally, and under some circumstances, even more effective leaders than men. The pandemic has really accelerated questions about whether a female leadership style, quote unquote, is more effective than the traditionally autocratic male approach. When crisis hits, research shows that organizations actually move away from a command and control approach to leadership and identify the need for a more relational leadership style. While this live cast is based on the book, The Collective Wisdom of High-Performing Women, it's ultimately a book about leadership. For those of you who have not yet been able to read the book, the 10 values-based leadership characteristics outlined in the book are courage, honesty, connection, compassion, energy, lifelong learning, tenacity, reinvention, generosity, and authenticity. We will have the treat of having the authors read 4 of these 10 qualities today, their own personal stories. Now, looking at these qualities, you can see that these are gender neutral and fit for building out formal as well as personal leadership. What resonated so loudly for me when I read this book is that these are also the characteristics of the emotionally intelligent leader. As Sandra mentioned, at IHHP, we teach emotional intelligence. It's our DNA. And in our work of developing exceptional leaders, these are the qualities that come up over and over again, associated with leaders who have the greatest impact on their people and on the business. The good news for all of us is that these skills and qualities can be learned, they can be developed, they can be mastered. We've got lots to cover in this hour. I hope that sets a good tone for what we're about to experience. I'm excited to welcome our 5 guests over the course of this next 50 minutes remaining. And you'll meet them one by one, and you'll conclude with all of us collectively addressing some of the questions and themes head on at the end of the readings. First, I'm thrilled and honored to introduce to you Colleen Moorhead. And we'll get Colleen to unmute and come on screen. Fantastic. Welcome, Colleen. Colleen is Chief Client Officer at Osler, Hoskin and Harcourt. She was also co-founder of E-Trade Canada. In addition to her role at Osler, Colleen is the co-founder and business director of the Judy Project at the University of Toronto's Rotman School of Management. Colleen will speak more to that in her presentation. She's been honored by the YWCA Toronto with a 2020 Women of Distinction Award. And most recently, Colleen was honored by the Women's College Hospital Foundation with the 2021 Trailblazer Award. Colleen is editor of the book and the stories that we're featuring today. Please join me in welcoming Colleen Moorhead. Colleen, over to you. Please set the stage for the rest of the live cast.
Perfect. Thank you, Cranla. I really appreciate being able to be part of today and spend the time with you. And I appreciate you kind of reaching out to us to get to today. I always look forward to us doing these events. I leave the events feeling invigorated and inspired. And I think right now we all need to look for inspiration and be in the company of equally optimistic people and consider our own personal leadership voices. As you know,
beautiful. I love that. Thank you.
Yes. We have just completed our first full year of working differently. So working from our home offices, it's a very integrated life we're living. And we sort of juggle our home responsibilities, pandemic fears, and our aspirations for a post-pandemic life. But I think the other thing is it's allowed us to be more reflective. So as the world turns again, what kind of work we want and what kind of leadership we want. So with your permission, I'm going to give you some background on where the Judy Project came from and some of our beginnings in terms of the book.
Yes, please. Beautiful.
So the Judy Project was inspired by the late Judy Elder. She was running Microsoft Canada online, and she was a dynamic leader, a visionary, and really well respected. She died suddenly in 2002 at the age of 47 from a rare blood disorder. So in her business life as a leader, she was passionate about inspiring women to be great organizational leaders. But I always think that she was Judy. She was a wife. She was a mother of two boys. She loved to cook. She loved to garden. But the way the Judy Project came about is she gave this fantastic, powerful speech in 2002 about women and ambition. And you can Google it and find it. Of course, you can buy the book. But the speech was called Mothers, Fathers, Men, Ambition. The men are the people and the values that motivate and shape women's success. And in the speech, she talked a lot about ambition. But I think what was really cool is she defined an inclusive kind of ambition, one that instead of representing greed and self-promotion, somehow, when we think about ambition, but it was more of a reflective, broader, I call it nobler approach, because she was ambitious for her company. She was ambitious for her leaders, her team, and yes, as an outcome, for herself. But so compelling was her articulation of this generous collective female ambition that when she passed away 3 weeks later, any of us who were in the audience and a number who knew her, we were inspired to create a leadership program named after her because we did not want this concept of collective ambition to be forgotten. And that was like 2002. So the project was born in 2003 at the Rotman School of Management with the support of 30 Canadian companies who wanted to support gender-based leadership even then. And again, that's 18 years ago. What the Judy Project is, it's a week-long retreat. Now, I call it a leadership spa because I think when you go to the spa, you focus on a part of your body. And in this case, it's the leadership voice. So it takes 30 ambitious female leaders out of their roles to focus on value-based leadership, their own personal style and strengths, and what it will take them to move to the next level in their organization. So now there's over 450 senior women executives in Canada that have participated in the project since inception, and they've gone on to larger roles in corporate Canada. We have chairs of banks, CEOs and presidents, many, many board members and C-suite executives who've gone through the program. Now, from this single program at Rotman, also Rotman has developed a broader initiative called Women in Business, and it's got emerging leaders, the Athena Project, back to work, because sometimes women take a period out or come to us from another market or country, and it allows and supports people re-entering. And it's fantastic how the program has grown. So then if I can, I'm going to go to the book. So in 2017, women go on the project and they go back to their organizations and they celebrate value-based leadership. But we wanted to make a larger impact. So that's why we did the book. And it's called The Collective Wisdom of High-Performing Women. And it's about leadership lessons. And it is featuring 70 women who are sharing their stories, their leadership lessons through storytelling. So you've mentioned the value-based leadership characteristics that we grouped all the stories under, but they are said as stories because I think when anyone reads a story, they can choose from that story the characteristics that resonate with them, and and what they want to modify in their world by virtue of that story. So I'm going to talk about, there was 3 objectives. So when we sat down to write the book, and now we've sold 15,000 copies, we have met with audiences like this, not this big in a virtual context, that's for sure, but over 10,000 people and 15,000 people have bought the book. So if you'll indulge me, I'll just give you quickly through what are the objectives of the book, and then we can get to storytelling, which is really the best part of it.
Sounds great, Colleen. Thank you.
So the first thing is about honest corporate storytelling as a platform to drive change. So we ask leaders to share their real stories. It isn't always perfect. And sometimes you end up coming to decisions that you make. And so we really think corporate storytelling, honest corporate storytelling, plays a real role in helping bring along and mentor and learn our younger. I think the second objective is those themes that we talk about. I think many of us, and I would put myself in this bucket, when we started on our work career, we emulated a style that wasn't really something that we felt comfortable with. We talk about in the book, the command and control style doesn't necessarily fit in for most women, but we were taught to be tough, don't cry, it was almost like we were being pushed to be a different kind of leader than would be our natural style. And one of the characteristics is authenticity, because you will only achieve results when you are believable and authentic. So that is the second objective. So no need to imitate, pull your own style into your leadership voice. And then the third objective is, I think, really important. I think one of the things that we find is the stories and the themes underline the importance of confidence and ambition in young women. It isn't like you start out at 25 and you feel like you can say anything. I often think, as you get older, you can be more assertive and say actually what you think, until you of course become 80 and wise, and whatever you want to say comes out of your mouth. So but the importance of cultivating confidence and ambition in our young people is really one of the things that we wished to do. So I encourage this very large audience, in terms of audience participation, to take those themes into your own work careers and play a role. Our young men and women in business need role models, they need mentors, they need sponsors. So you need to actively play our role, pulling young women up, taking more risks in providing assignments, stretch assignments, and doing things different. So if you are a male or female leader on this call, I want you to think about how you can help a younger colleague develop their leadership skills, to help them know now what you know now. So share your stories with somebody younger, make introductions, go out of your way to help. It is my way, whenever I do these presentations, to thank the men who have joined the audience today, and thank you for being here. We need men in leadership to equally own equality through their conscious actions. The world changes because we all do want it to. And when I think most women of my generation recall a sponsor or a mentor, it was a man. And so all of us are grateful for the brave men who took chances and understood the value that we brought to our leadership organizations, and also represented us when we weren't in the room.
Mm-hmm.
It is, I think one of the things, it's often misplaced gallantry that reduces a woman's career opportunity. She's got 2 young children, she wouldn't want to travel. So this revenue oriented job is not for her. So in any way, Cranla, thank you for allowing us here. And I think we're going to move to storytelling. The thing I would last say is storytelling is a real, I call it a superpower, but it gives shape to your experience. And when our stories are told with honesty and without apology and told to a broader audience, we really can move the dial. So Cranla, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. You've set the tone and the framing up so beautifully for today. Congratulations to you on the Judy Project and on the success of the book. We will now have our first storyteller join us. I'd like to introduce Janet Keston. Janet was Chief Creative Officer of Ogilvy and Mather Ad Agency and was one of the leaders behind Dove's landmark and highly successful campaign for Real Beauty. Many of us are familiar with that. In 2012, Janet was named to the 100 most influential women in advertising list by Advertising Age magazine. Janet co-founded Swim in 2012, a company that helps creative companies close big leadership skills gaps. And Janet's 2014 HarperCollins book called Darling, You Can't Do Both, and Other Noise to Ignore on Your Way Up was listed among Inc. magazine's 2017 top 60 books on leadership. Please welcome Janet Keston, who will be sharing her story about the leadership characteristic connection. Welcome, Janet, over to you.
Thanks, Cranla. Welcome to my kitchen. There's actually relevance in me being in the kitchen, as you'll see. Before I read my story, I want to tell you a teeny bit about Judy herself, because Judy was one of my greatest friends. And the speech that she wrote, Mothers, Fathers, Men, and Ambition, actually came out of a trip that she and I and 4 other friends took in 1997. Yes, that long ago. And we were all kind of, we were moms, we were mid-career, like early to mid-career. We were mothers of youngish children. And we decided on Labor Day weekend to take off for Italy and leave our kids with their dads to get them to school for the new school year and spend some time on us. And we spent every night cooking together, talking together, drinking together. And on the 3rd night, Judy said, you know, I really think we need to have topics of conversation, or we're just going to repeat ourselves over and over and over again. We all know each other too well. So she said, what should we talk about? And Mothers, Fathers, Men, and Ambition were actually the subjects that we chose for those conversations. And we were done with Mothers, Fathers, and Men in 3 nights. But for the remaining 4 nights, all we did was talk about ambition and how much we were, most of us, afraid to own it, to ever say the word. It was kind of a dirty word in the mind of most of us. And Judy was really the only person that was the exception to that rule. And in the conversations that we had, we started to just put out into the universe, to get airy-fairy on you, we just started to put out into the universe what we wanted. And a year later, all of us were in significantly larger jobs. Judy had gone to MSN. I had taken the Chief Creative Officer job at Ogilvy. I didn't even know I wanted it. And had we not had that conversation, if we had not had that cohort, had we not had all those experiences together, the cooking, which was something that Judy loved and all of us loved, and cooking made its way into the Judy Project, because the Judy Project is about the whole person, not just the person that you are at work. If it had not been for all of that, all of us would have had different lives and different careers. So the reason I even have a place in this book is because of that trip such a long time ago. So I will read this to you. You'd be really good at this job if you didn't wear your face on your face. I was new to the Chief Creative Officer role at Ogilvy and Mather, and my boss felt the need to share this helpful observation after seeing me roll my eyes during a frustrating conversation with a client. I rolled my eyes to prove his point. Everyone has an Achilles heel. Mine has been my face. If I was happy, you knew it. Sad, thrilled, laughter too loud, and crying, God forbid. All the feelings flashing like a neon sign. All the behavior that gets women labeled emotional. And in business, emotional equals unprofessional. But what if it doesn't? What if it's actually a secret weapon that creates deeper relationships among colleagues, with customers and clients? What if it's the key to connection? Years before the unfortunate eye-rolling incident, Barb, one of my important clients, greeted me saying, "You look awful," as I arrived late to an early morning meeting. She and I were often at odds, and I wasn't sure how to respond. Let it slide? Make a little joke? Get on with the reason we were there? Or I spent the night in the hospital with my 3-year-old, I said, as to my horror, my eyes blurred with tears. When I got to the babysitter's last night, he was in the window waving. By the time I reached the front door, a fountain of blood was gushing from his head. He had jumped off the couch straight into a glass coffee table. Fear, hospital stitches, mother guilt, etc., etc. Oh, she nodded with understanding. I have a 3-year-old, and he's a holy terror too. We spent a few minutes comparing the premature gray hairs that come from having boys who leap before they look. Then we carried on our business with a new sense of ease. I gave her a peek into my life. She opened the door to her own, and it changed the dynamic between us forever. Who knew that a simple human exchange had such power to build bridges? Me, I knew. I grew up in and out of the French community in Quebec, where open affection, big gestures, dramatic feelings, and what we now call oversharing were the norm. And I came into the workplace wearing those clothes. Mostly, I found that openness to be contagious, to be connective tissue, except with the titled. The bigger the office, the tighter the lip. So it was a lesson I ignored while I was busy mimicking the behavior of the grown-ups, guys, and the rare woman who'd made it into their circle. Those people didn't fling their lives all over the boardroom table, except for an occasional flare of anger or the fist pumping that comes with a big win. They kept a lid on their emotions. The tone was light or business serious. To be like them, I needed to toughen up. I was told, if you're a little girl, you have to be a big bitch to be taken seriously. So I closed my ears to my own inner voice, the one that said feeling is okay. The problem with that, though, is that it's my relationships with coworkers and clients that have meant the difference between feeling joy or feeling misery. I liked my job. Sometimes I loved it, but it wasn't always satisfying. It wasn't always fulfilling, meaningful, pick your adjective. Feeling connected to other people was what got me through. The first time I spoke in public, it was at a client offsite. I and my art director partner, Nancy Vonk, who, if you read the book, you will meet as well. We had just won our first Cannes Lion, which is a fancy ad award, for a campaign we'd done for Dove. I was invited to talk about what it took to come up with that idea and why the client agency relationship was so important. I wrote the speech, made the slides, and 2 days before the event, realized that I didn't want to do it. Nerves. The idea of standing in front of a group of business people, dealing with a slide carousel, a clicker. What if the technology failed? What if I couldn't remember my stuff? I could hardly breathe. Could I do it without slides? Fewer moving parts meant less could go wrong, but I still needed to show them something. I sat on the floor of my office, cutting pictures out of magazines like a 5-year-old, sticking them onto big sheets of colored paper, 17 in all, each with a headline. On the back of every page, I wrote 2 or 3 words to remind myself of what I wanted to say. When the day came, my legs were shaking so badly that instead of standing at the front of the room, I pulled a small table close to the audience, sat on it cross-legged, the rainbow stack of paper in my lap. I flipped up those slides one at a time and just talked. I invited them into the conversation with me. I knew if I could connect with them, I'd be okay. When I finished, no one left the room. We just kept on talking. Connection got me through. There's a management style called leading by walking around, and it's exactly what it sounds like. My style was kind of like that. I tried not to default to email or even to the phone. As much as possible, I visited people, sat in their offices, listened, chatted, stayed caught up, let them into my life as they let me into theirs. Maybe that's why when a young employee was torn between following the woman he loved to another city and maybe giving up the career he loved, or staying in Toronto and maybe giving up the woman, he came to my office to cry. People often came to my office to cry. Connection comes from an emotional place, the place that says it's okay to feel, the place that's perceived to be a deficit for women. The sternness, anger, toughness, even rage of men has been grandfathered in, even admired as ruling with a firm hand. Boys will be boys and all that. I've come to the conclusion that it's time for some grandmothering in. Here's what I imagine our grandmas, along with the most current management thinkers, would say. Try walking instead of texting. Let an open door policy become an open heart policy. Ask more questions. Listen instead of talking. Share yourself more. Try not to wear your face on your face quite so much. But remember that your heart has a place on your sleeve. It's how you connect, and connection is a superpower.
Thank you, Janet. If you can just stay with me for a second. It was just so special to hear you read that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And also introducing Judy to us in a very intimate and heartfelt way. That was beautiful.
Thanks.
You and I were going to have a little bit of an interaction between stories. And I think what I'm going to do is make a courageous decision as the moderator to actually move through all the stories to make sure we hear from everyone. Yeah. And then we'll make sure that we're through everyone. They've had their opportunity, and we'll reconvene at the end.
Totally with you.
Yes, that was beautifully done. Thank you so much. So as you go off camera, Janet, we are going to welcome our next reader, Sandra Ronzik-Popik. And Sandra holds a master's degree in business administration, as well as a master's certificate in financial services leadership from the Schulich School of Business. With over 20 years experience and holding several vice president roles across the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, also known as CIBC, Sandra was appointed to the role of Vice President of Talent Acquisition. Sandra is passionate about promoting inclusion and diversity. And one cool thing about Sandra is that in the year 2000, she led one of 4 Canadian teams to a successful finish of a 12-day Eco Challenge expedition race in Borneo, Malaysia. Now, I think I've seen video clips of this, and it is one of the most grueling experiences out there. Sandra's story falls under the quality of compassion and is entitled Making It Personal. I'm going to hand it over to you, Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cranla, for the opportunity. And as I get into the story, I just want to say a big heartfelt thank you to Colleen. Colleen, thank you for your vision. You know, when I shared this with Colleen recently, when Colleen first reached out to me with the idea of writing a story for this book, I have to admit and say, when I first got that email, I looked at it and I thought 2 things. One was, I don't have time to write a story. And the second one was, and even if I did, what would I possibly write about? And I promptly proceeded to delete Colleen's email. And it wasn't until a couple of weeks later that another colleague of mine reached out to me to ask me to proofread her story that she was writing for the book, that I kind of did a second take to say, why did I dismiss this idea so quickly? And realize that, you know, at the end of the day, we have time for what we make time for. And sometimes we perhaps just don't take the moment to uncover what stories we have on and what we can share. So Colleen, thank you for your vision and for making this come to life. And so my story is in the section on compassion. I will read it to you out of the hard copy. It's actually nice to hold a physical book in my hand. We do so much digital interaction these days. So the story is called Making It Personal. Drive, focus, goals, results. These are just some of many business imperatives, just some of the many critical elements of future success. But how about kindness, caring, and being personal? I used to be and continue to be very results focused. While I see that as important, I have learned that work is not just about what we do, it's also about how we do it. And two particularly defining moments in my career helped me realize how critical the human element is in everything that we do. The first came fairly early on when a colleague pulled me aside to share some feedback. I didn't think he had enough of a chance to see me in action, so I was a little skeptical. However, I had always held him in high regard and was appreciative that he wanted to connect. All I remember from our entire conversation was him saying, people are sometimes intimidated by you. You don't have to be all business all the time. My initial inner reaction was, you bet I'm all business all the time. That's how I get results. That's how I get things done. That's a good thing, isn't it? I went home that day and actually had to think about whether he was praising me for my focused and results oriented style or giving me constructive feedback on how to do things better. I didn't get it. All business all the time was so ingrained in my mind and my approach that I didn't even think about how that may have been coming across. But after some reflection, I understood. The minute people arrived at one of my meetings, I would go straight to the business at hand. No time wasted with how was your weekend? How was your family? In retrospect, I could have certainly taken a moment to ask such questions. Because don't get me wrong, I had always sincerely cared about people I worked with. It's just that I was too focused on efficiently getting to business. It took this feedback to realize that I wasn't always projecting my true desire for connection and maintained too big of a separation between business and personal. We need people to support us, to work with us to achieve common goals. That can be done effectively only if we genuinely care about them and if we show we care through our words and our actions. I'm certainly glad that I got this lesson so early in my career. The other moment came when my VP at the time said something that made me stop and really think. I was explaining a rather complex business challenge, something that involved consulting multiple business partners, synthesizing key facts, pulling out the most critical figures, and outlining options, implications, and recommendations. I mentioned that I had responded to one of our more contrarian business partners with, it's nothing personal, it's just business. My manager stopped me mid sentence and said slowly and clearly, Sandra, it's all personal. I paused. I reflected. This is not where I had been expecting our conversation to go. Perhaps I even expected to be praised for the great job I had done managing the complex issue. But my whole approach was being challenged. Of course, I realized he was right. How could have I not seen it? I was dealing with people. Everything we do is about people. How could it not be personal? It was this short, quick comment that completely altered how I look at work. It's essential that we remember the human element behind everything we do and not be afraid to make it personal. While drive, focus, goals, and results are all critical components of our business lives, so is the underlying, non-compromising element of being human. We can't lose our humanity in the world of business. And as our CEO, Victor Dodik, once said, don't leave your hearts at home when you come to work. The only way we can inspire the hearts and minds of our teams is by taking the time to be kind and caring. So go ahead, make it personal.
Wow. Thank you, Sandra. I'm really filling up with all of the wisdom and the care in each of these stories. So that's a beautiful one. I really love, we can't lose our humanity in the world of business. So we'll see you on the other side once we've had everybody be able to share their story. Thank you so much. And as you go off camera, we will welcome Allison. Allison Colville is a Canadian retail leader and former president of Hudson's Bay. Having held many senior executive roles over 20 years in a highly competitive, ever-changing industry, she's done it all. Allison is also an active member in the community, serving on the board of directors for Providence Healthcare Foundation, Unity Health Network. And Allison's greatest joys come from her wonderful children and husband and the success each of them has had while also being her biggest fans. Thank you, Allison, for joining us today and sharing your journey of reinvention through the leadership quality of tenacity. Allison, the floor is yours. You're welcome.
I'm really excited to be here. It's hard to follow those two fantastic stories. And as Kwanla mentioned, my chap is in the chapter of tenacity. But it's also very much for me about being open to new experiences, challenging your own status quo, and you may just find new passion, different successes, and potentially grit that you just didn't even know you had. So here I go. My cell phone was pressed to my ear as I paced my bedroom one evening in 2012. Richard Baker, the owner of Hudson's Bay Company, my boss's boss, someone I truly respected, who was trying to help me gain some perspective on a move he wanted me to make within the company. You feel I'm a good leader, right? He said. Yes, of course, I responded. Okay then, he said. Sometimes you have to hitch your wagon to successful people, trust that you too will be successful, and take the job that's there. My mind whirled. In an environment where a lot of people were being let go, that morning I'd been offered a senior vice president position outside of the retail roles I typically worked in. I was already an SVP, and I had my sights set higher. It felt like my results were now being overlooked. My whole career, most of which I'd spent at the Bay, had been focused on fashion. Not only did the offer not feel like a good fit, it wasn't what I wanted to do. So when I was told about it at work earlier that day, I was angry and I pushed back. I went to HR and asked them, what are my options for leaving the company? Then I went home, calling my husband to tell him the news and of course to vent. Now I was trying to make sense of what Richard was telling me on the phone. We could have let you go. That would have been easy, but we need you in this position because it's right for the company. Take some time and think about it. In the coming days, I struggled with the decision, wondering if this was my time to move on. Then my daughter, who was 16, helped me put things in perspective. Let me get this straight, she said. They're not taking any money away from you. You'll still be a senior vice president, and your job won't be as crazy. Why are you upset? The magnitude of the ego that was in the way dawned on me. So ultimately, I did what I'd always told my kids to do. I put on my big girl pants and I got on with it. It was the best decision I'd ever made. I was in the role for a year and had so much fun. I subsequently took on positions I'd been passed over for in the first place. Plus, the experience was great preparation for a role I took on for the next 3 years, starting in 2014. I was the senior vice president and managing director of Hudson's Bay Home and Home Outfitters. Once again, the role was really unexpected and something that wasn't in my wheelhouse. Never had I imagined that I'd run such a large and frankly tired home business in 90 Bay locations, plus the home outfitters chain. But this time, right from the start, I embraced the change and the challenge wholly. Clearly, we required major product re-engineering and a new marketing image. And the corporate strategy at the time was actually to decrease the number of home-oriented products in our stores, or in many cases, to exit home category altogether, in order to grow other businesses like fashion. This could have discouraged the teams, but I rallied them with the mantra, we are shrinking ourselves to greatness. I wanted them to be on the offense versus the defense. Don't think of this as something that's happening to you, I told them. Instead, own it. I realized that I was in a good position for this transformation, not despite, but because of my fashion background. I applied my knowledge of fashion to the home business. What's the next big trend? What brands are emerging as unique and exciting? What are the colors of the season that we can add to the towels to freshen up our customers' home wardrobe? Sales and profits soared. I learned a lot about being a leader in the years since I ended up accepting the position that at first I didn't feel was right. Now I tell others that when an opportunity comes along, whether you think it's a good fit for you or not, consider taking it for the sake of learning something valuable. And remember that nothing ever stays the same.
Thank you, Allison. These stories are just so, for me, they're so authentic, and everyone's just sharing their vulnerability and their personal journey, and you've done the same. Thank you so much. So as you go off camera, we'll get to our final reader, Linda Mackay. Linda holds an MBA from the Rotman School of Management, as well as certifications in change management and customer satisfaction. Linda was an executive at TD for the last 15 years, most recently, the Senior Vice President of Branch Banking Transformation Strategy. Linda is currently enjoying a sabbatical from work, and she remains passionate about purpose and making a difference, especially for women in leadership and diversity and inclusion. An interesting tidbit about Linda, she is a foodie who continues to master her wood-fired pizza making skills among her other hobbies. It's fitting then that her story is about lifelong learning. Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Cranla, and thank you to all the wonderful women that have gone before me. Amazing stories. And I too am going to go old school and read from the book. So mine's entitled Lessons Learned. I can boil down my leadership lessons learned over a long career into 5 pieces of advice. Number 1 is dwell in possibility. That's the title of an Emily Dickinson poem that I love. Most people don't know the whole poem, but many know the title as a quote in and of itself. I think it speaks to the idea that Judy Elder articulated when she gave her speech on declaring your ambition and then going for it. Much of leadership is about believing in yourself and your potential, and even more so, the potential of others. For me, it's about helping colleagues to expand the boundaries of what they believe to be their personal potential. While careers can start out by balancing your emotional quotient, your curiosity, your intelligence, over time, that intelligent piece isn't a differentiator. Your EQ and your curiosity become the differentiator for most leaders. How you relate to people, how you communicate, how you solve problems, and help those on your team to do better and be better than they thought possible. Believing in possibility, along with helping others to see it and achieve it. It's a powerful leadership lesson and attribute. Number 2 is be early, be honest when faced with a problem. When something goes wrong, and it will often, my mantra has been be early and be honest. Deal with tough issues head on. And as hard and as awkward as those conversations can be with your boss or your colleague, it's a far better way to solve problems than to let them linger and fester and probably become worse. Early in my career, when I made a mistake or a problem emerged, I'd spend a lot of time thinking about how to fix it. And that's quite a bit of pressure for one person. And often the situation gets worse day by day. Bringing in a colleague or asking a boss early and asking for help means that you're going to get to a better solution faster. It also demonstrates your character, your integrity, and your commitment to doing the right thing. It ensures that you'll have a chance to get the help before the situation becomes unsolvable and takes more time and far more resources than it should have in the first place. Number 3 is help others succeed. Good leaders recognize that helping others speaks to their own leadership. You won't need to showcase what you've done. Those around you will quickly make the connection that you have a high-performing team or a key contributor to the team. And I found that recognizing people on a daily basis bolsters their success. Whether you give them a handwritten card, a thank you email, or have an encouraging chat in the hallway when we could be in the hallway, or say thanks in front of others in a meeting. Recently, we were going into what promised to be a lengthy and difficult meeting. And ahead of time, I got a team member who'd be leading the meeting a thank you card and gift card. At the end of the meeting, assuming it went well, and it did, I gave her the recognition she'd earned and deserved in front of the person heading up the project. Those, what seemingly are little things, mean a lot to people. Recognition and gratitude are too important to be left to an afterthought. Number 4 is stay authentic. I have a philosophy of demonstrating fun and a sense of humor, especially when things are tense. It helps people to work better together. As you reach senior levels in an organization, people often feel that they can't approach you, and they're intimidated simply by virtue of your position or title. So it's important to stay true to who you are. I also make it a priority to be transparent. Before or after a meeting, I have really honest conversations with the folks on my team about what I'm worried about, how I think a meeting might play out, but I get them to share their views too, and I encourage people to disagree with me. In fact, I often love to assign someone the role of devil's advocate in important meetings. I'll challenge someone to be the dissenter, because we have to know how something can go very right or horribly wrong before we execute. And number 5, I feel like I should have trademarked this expression, which is hire for will and train for skill. In my business, we exist to help customers. Ultimately, the customer is your paycheck. So it's important you make sure you have a great team that can deliver the customer experience that they both expect and deserve. To that end, I hire for will and train for skill. That means I put a lot of importance on hiring people with the right attitude, with passion, and alignment to values. That's critical. I'd argue it's almost impossible to create a great attitude, or passion or values for that matter, where they don't naturally exist. People who might not necessarily tick every box in terms of qualifications are often the greatest asset on your teams because they are curious and they ask terrific questions. The questions that get the rest of us thinking and perhaps challenging what we take for granted. It's easier for someone to grow into skills and competencies than it is attitude and will.
Thank you, Linda. We're going to ask the rest of the guests to come on and join us. And while they re-enter and take themselves off mute and re-engage their video, you shared some very specific lessons learned. And what really popped up for me was when you talked about emotional intelligence, of course, and curiosity being the differentiators for leaders. And in the work that I do sometimes, I've actually seen some resistance to getting curious and learning and growing. I'd call those people sort of the status quo bunch. And this is the opposite. That status quo mentality is really the opposite of what we know to be integral to strong and effective leadership. So we have everybody back with us. Thank you to all of you for your contributions in setting us up so well. For those who haven't read the book, for those of us who have, to go back and maybe pick out a few really critical pieces that we want to underline and carry forward as our mantras. We have 6 minutes left, and we do have time to tackle a couple of the themes. The first thing I wanted to share was a quote that I thought was universal to all of the stories, and that is, when you enter into the realm of leadership, you're in the business of people. So I thought I'd sort of throw that out for any reflection, any additional comments, if you want to build on your story at all. I thought that was something that was just really central to everything that we're talking about today.
I can probably just give a quick snippet. I learned the hard way in my first executive role, which is, thinking about who you're going to have impact on and how they're going to have impact on you. And often people think about managing their boss. But the lesson that I learned is, really be cognizant of who your peers are, how you're interacting with your peers, who's an influencer within your group of peers, and how are you connecting with them. Again, back to Sandra's line, making it personal. How are you connecting personally, as well as with those folks who are going to work for you, who will ultimately have influence on what gets done and what gets delivered. And again, people have to know you care about them as people, and it is kind of up and down and across organizations, not just those folks that you work for, which is kind of the obvious one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would add, I mean, I think that, oh, sorry, go ahead. Just that the notion of people, people make up teams. And I would say in my career, the recognizing how important teams are, and that everyone in your organization has a voice, especially those closest to your customer, whatever sector you're in. So listen to them. And especially in a world today where we're talking about diversity and equality, making sure that your teams are made up of people who are diverse and think differently than you, and maybe even can cover some of your blind spots, and maybe are smarter than you in many cases. So don't underestimate what this accumulation of people coming together, I think, have been some of my greatest successes, is getting that alignment and teams working together.
Yeah, Allison, that's a great point. I think maybe one of the things I would add as well is just the focus on establishing your relationships with your partners before you need them. Right. So that means personal connection first, understand who they are, help them understand who you are, and really showing that care, not because you need something from them, but just because you're building that personal connection first. And that will then act as a foundation on which you can build all the business connections. And personally, I think that we want to avoid this emotional neutrality. Right. And sometimes if we approach something purely with the business mindset, then we might be perceived to be emotionally neutral. And perhaps maybe in the past or even today, some people see that as appropriate. But I would say that emotions are actually really powerful, and we need to embrace them.
I work in a creative field, obviously, and that's different from the way things get done is different from what happens in the regular business universe. And typically people who wind up in the most senior jobs in my world, it's because they have great portfolios. And I never aspired to, a top job. That was not what I was in the game for, because I just liked making things. But my partner, Nancy, who I mentioned before, she and I started the internship program at Ogilvy a long time ago, long before we had any kind of a title. We were just interested in the development of other people. And so we created this program, and it became like the Good Housekeeping seal of approval for all the young people coming into the business. And some of them we hired, and some of them other people hired. But in doing that, we learned how to develop talent. And when the time came that they were looking in our place for, somebody to take over the group altogether, there were a lot of people with great portfolios, but there were very few whose true passion was the people. And that was what actually got us the job that we never wanted and gave us a whole different career. So, leadership is so often, in my business, it's a portfolio, and someone else's, it's a P&L, whatever. But people always comes down the list, but I actually think it's the differentiator.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Colleen, we'd love to hear from you. I think everyone else has had an opportunity to weigh in.
Okay, I'll be brief, but I'd say two things to your point. One is in today's complex world, if you're a leader that doesn't pull other people in and look for other people's views and embrace other voices, you're going to fail. So that's just a beginning. And then the other observation I'd make is we're all living on these screens like we are. So it's way more work to include people. So all of us have to practice the art of engaging people in conversations and in getting their views. So, and that takes work. So book your appointments, do one-on-ones. And then when you're in a session like this, do exactly what you do, pull it out of us.
Mhm. All great points. I can't believe we're at the end of the hour. That went obviously far faster than I thought it would. One thing I wanted to add before we close is that whole idea in the book, and this really came from Judy and in her speech, that sense of finding great strength in building alliances and nurturing allies, that whole approach, because people never get anywhere unless someone wants them to. And I thought that that was really powerful. And that, you know, if you can find someone who believes in you and you can help that person to also achieve their goals and objectives, then that's the win-win. So thank you, all of you. This has just been such an energizing, I've been trying to keep up with the chat. I mean, there's obviously going to have to be a lot of follow-up after this. Thank you to our audience who demonstrated such great interest and created awesome energy in supporting the event and in the chat today. Very, very special thanks to our guests who have educated us and challenged us and inspired us today through the sharing of their personal stories, their experiences, and their collective wisdom. As Sandra mentioned at the outset, there will be many opportunities over the coming weeks for you to dive in deeper into the content via our email follow-up, the LinkedIn event page. And for now, I encourage you to read the book and join the conversation. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Always. Exclamation mark.